Both of these use the exact same texture scan. One feels printed onto the surface, and the other just seems to sit on top. The difference? Displacement. Do you ever add a texture in Photoshop and feel like it just looks flat? Professional designers use one extra step to make texture blend into the surface itself, and it's called a displacement map. In my last video, we made custom textures from scratch. This is the next step, making those same textures feel like they were physically printed onto the work. Here is why your texture looks fake. Real-world texture isn't flat. The light will catch grain, wrinkles, dents, and imperfections differently depending on the surface. But most Photoshop textures are completely flat. They just sit on top of the artwork, but they don't integrate into it. Real texture changes with the surface underneath. That is what most digital textures are missing. So why does this matter? Look at this edge right here. The artwork stays perfectly straight, completely ignoring the physical fold in the paper underneath. But if you were to physically print this onto paper, the ink would follow the fibers. But with a basic overlay, the graphic completely ignores the topography of the page. The edges will stay flat, even with deep creases. But have a look at the difference once displacement is applied. The artwork deforms. It then starts to catch the shadows, the creases, and actually responds to the surface underneath. And this is the moment it starts looking like an overlay. Now you might be thinking, if I want it to look real, why not just print it, fold it, and scan it back in again? And honestly, you can, if you have the time, and a client who promises they'll never make a revision. Real design needs flexibility. So if you physically distress an artwork, you're locked into that exact version. But with displacement maps and things like smart objects, the texture will stay completely editable, and we can go back and make as many revisions as we like. Change the logo, change the typography, change the color. Photoshop will recalculate the distortion instantly, so you can get the realism of physical texture without destroying the flexibility of the design. So what actually is a displacement map? It sounds highly technical, but all it is a grayscale depth blueprint. Photoshop will read the black, white, and grey like surface height. Dark areas will push pixels in one direction, bright areas pull them in another. So instead of placing texture flat on top, it actually forces the artwork to wrap into the surface underneath. It's basically how Photoshop fakes physical depth using light values. Here's how we can make a displacement map. The quality of your map will change the final result. And that's why we can't just use a raw photo as the map, because there'll be too many colors, and color data confuses the filter. I'm in Photoshop and I've added my image that I'm going to make into a displacement map. I'm going to desaturate the image first, giving it less color data. So we can go to Image, Adjustments, and Desaturate, or we can press Command, Shift, and U. We're going to need to increase the contrast, and I can do this in the Curves Adjustments or the Levels Adjustments panel. The reason we want to do this is because we want Photoshop to understand where the highs and lows of the surface are. For the hidden trick that most tutorials skip is we're going to also add a Gaussian blur. This is because if your texture has micro noise, the displacement filter will give you some jagged edges. But by softening the texture, you will give the displacement a smoother transition, so no more jagged or pixelated edges. Add some Gaussian blur. I'm going to put it around 5. Then when we're done, I'm going to go to File and Save As, give it a title and press OK. Now for actually applying the displacement map. So grab your image that you want to distort. I have my poster work here. I'm going to make sure that it's a smart object. Right click and go to Create Smart Object. This is so that we can come back and adjust the settings later if we need. Bring in your original texture layer into Photoshop, duplicate it, then drag one of the layers down underneath your artwork layer. Then just click on the I button to hide the top layer just for now. Now we're going to filter, distort, and displace. You can just copy my settings. Make sure to pick stretch to fit. I'm going to pick repeat edge pixels and also tick embed file data in smart object. But the most important options here is the horizontal and vertical scales. Start subtle. I usually put around 5 or 10 to begin with, and I can always increase this if it needs some more displacement. Then you're going to select your displacement map from your files, press OK. Immediately you will see the artwork will start locking into that paper texture. This is where it starts feeling physical instead of digital. Displacement will create the distortion and sense of movement, but blending is what really sells the realism. So another great hack that I use is using Blend If, and we can find that in our Layer Styles panel in Photoshop. And what this does is it lets those shadows and highlights blend naturally into our artwork. We don't want to just drag this slider or it will look harsh in the clip. Instead, we can hold Option and just split the slider in half, and this will soften the transition. As you drag it, watch the artwork. you will see those deep shadows and bright highlights actually punching through the paper texture. So now the design isn't just warped around the surface, it actually feels printed into it. Now for the last step, we are going to unhide that top texture layer, and we're going to add a blending mode. So I'm choosing color dodge, then decreasing the opacity down a little bit. Now the texture feels truly embedded in the original artwork, as if it was already there to begin with. When we compare the two side by side, you can really see the difference. One looks like a digital file saved out of Photoshop, and the other looks like a physical asset that we can actually reach out and touch. So now you can see the physical grain of that paper is embedded into the surface. And what's great is displacement maps can work on anything, so it can also work for fabric, graphic work, same principle every time. So this is how you stop placing texture onto your work and actually make it feel like it was printed onto it. But this is only part of it. In my last video, I showed how professionals build and scan their own textures from scratch. So if you want texture that looks and feels premium, go watch that next. Bye!